Brian Wilson, my dear friend Brian Wilson, a genius, Brian Wilson. The day he passed, a sad day for music, a sad day for all of us. I'm Brad Gilderman, engineer, producer, owner of Little Big Room Studios in Burbank, and I was lucky enough to know Brian and spend a lot of time with Brian at different stages in his life. I started working with Brian in the 80s and did 2 albums with him, Brian Wilson, the Love and Mercy record, and what we call the Sweet Insanity record. Through that time, I'd probably spent a good 4 years with Brian on and off. I got to be real close with him. I got to spend alone time with him and got to really know who Brian was at that point. I first remember Brian when I was 13 years old from the Beach Boys. Fun, 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 good vibrations, God only knows. And then I was lucky enough to go see them in concert, and I'd never seen anything like it. First time I met Brian was I was called by a good friend of mine, Michael Bernard, and he was working on the comeback solo album of Brian's, Brian Wilson, Love and Mercy. They had finished tracking and had a basic formula and a basic instrumentals of some of the songs that they were going to be doing for the album, but they needed more engineers to work on the project because they were kind of going around the clock and doing it in different places. So I came in as one of the extra engineers and started working on Love and Mercy at Ground Control Studios in Santa Monica. Great place, was fantastic, doesn't exist anymore. Michael introduced me to him. There was another gentleman there, Andy Paley, who was really a great collaborator working with Brian. And he introduced me around. Brian was like, "Hey, Brad, nice to meet you," and walked off. Started banging on the piano and doing his thing. Then my job was to capture everything that was happening in that room, because I think Brian was making a record like he was doing in the old days, experimenting and trying different things, and Andy Paley was helping him. Russ Titleman, the main producer, had basically cut the basic tracks and let these guys kind of do their thing for a while. So at that point, I'm spending, I want to say we spent close to a year doing overdubs and putting on all different kinds of instruments, whether it's guitars, glockenspiels, doing vocals, doing harmony stacks, the old Brian Wilson harmony stacks, doing all that stuff. Like I said, we probably spent about a year doing that. And then the album, we kind of finished, and the album went off to be mixed by the great Hugh Padgham and Russ Titleman at A&M Studios at the time. And my job was done. I saw I saw a normal life out of Brian at that point with Love and Mercy and the Brian Wilson album. Landy was around, but he let Brian do his own thing. He didn't quite take over. And one day we had this great session. Paul Schaefer, who was the band leader of David Letterman, was out making an album, going around the world, going to different states and making music from a different state. And when he came to California, he wanted to make the California sound. So who do you go to for the California sound? You go to Brian Wilson. So Paul Schaefer comes in, Brian Wilson, they start writing a song, and they figure something out. And all of a sudden, they start bringing in musicians. Mick Fleetwood came in, or Fleetwood Mac, to lay down drums. It was insane. He did one take. It was great. Then he came back in the room, and they listened. And everybody's talking. Then all of a sudden, they're drinking beer. They're drinking another beer. Mick now has 10 beers. And they go, "Mick, go out and give us another take." So Mick Fleetwood goes out to the drums. He's sloshed at this point. He's out of it. And as he's playing, he goes, "You know what? I think I'd feel better if Brian was out here standing with me as I was playing the drums." So Brian runs out into the live room, sits next to Mick Fleetwood, next to the drums, and Mick starts playing the drums, and Brian's sitting there bopping, and by 2/3 of the song, Mick fell totally over, drunk, over the whole drum kit, and passed out. And that was our drum take. So I had 1.5 drum takes, and we put that together. We had Dick Dale come in. Dick Dale is the king of surf guitars. He started to drink a bunch of champagne, played his surf lick. It was only 2 surf licks, but it took about 4 hours to get it done. Then we were lucky enough to have other great people come in. Joe Walsh from the Eagles came in. played down some guitar. Greg Fillinganes came in and played piano. These were kind of guys that didn't get wasted and made it through it. But when it was all said and done, I don't know how we got through it, but this magical song came out on Paul Shaffer's album of the California Sound. I heard back from Brian's people sometime, maybe 6 months after that, and they wanted the album remixed. So they asked me to go in, take it back to A&M Studios, and recall and remix the work that Hugh Padgham had done, which kills me because he's my idol. It came out, great album, critically acclaimed, amazing stuff with Terence Trent D'Arby, if anybody remembers him, was on that. It was just a real magical album. And that was kind of the end of my time with Brian for a while. But I want to say maybe a year or so later, maybe 2 years later, I get another call. This time I get a call from Dr. Landy. In case you don't know who Dr. Landy is, there was a time Brian Wilson, after he left the Beach Boys and went on tour, he stayed at home and write. He wrote Pet Sounds, but after Pet Sounds, he started to not want to go anywhere or do anything. So all of a sudden, Brian stayed at home and stayed in bed for 5 years. He ate hamburgers from McDonald's, had sand put all around his bedroom and his house, and would never leave. At this point, Brian he was 500 pounds, sick, on drugs, everything. And at that point, the Wilson family knew Brian needed help, and they reached out to a doctor named Dr. Eugene Landy. Dr. Eugene Landy was known as the psychiatrist and helper of the stars. And he could get people off drugs, alcohol, but his process was very intense, 24-hour takeover. So he ended up taking Brian to Hawaii, brought Brian down to 200 pounds from 500 pounds, got him off drugs, eating well, and brought this man back to life. That was the good Dr. Eugene Landy. And Landy called me to say they would like me to help them make a new solo record for Brian, which ends up being Sweet Insanity. As time went on, Dr. Landy started to go crazy in his thought and wanting to take over Brian. He wanted to take over his financing. He wanted to take over his house. He wanted to take over everything that had to do with Brian Wilson. And that's where Dr. Landy started turning into the crazy Dr. Landy, writing lyrics for the songs, having the kids who always were watching Brian 24/7 and always knew where Brian was and what he was doing. Surf Nazis, sometimes is what they were called. I got to spend a lot of alone time with Brian, and I could fend them off sometimes to get some sushi. They wouldn't let him eat sushi. It was a great time. I'd let Brian talk to his wife, his ex-wife, and they wouldn't let him talk to that. So I let Brian have certain things, but this is where Landy started to take control. I saw a big difference in Brian between the first solo record and the second solo record. First solo record, Brian was really very focused and very into it and alert and moving about. When we started to do the second record, Sweet Insanity, I was able to see a huge difference in Brian. At that point, he was way more controlled. He was drugged a lot more. He was heavily sedated, and he was more, I hate to use the word comatose, but it was more in a comatose way. He was really kept under control. The first record, he was free to do whatever. But as more time that Landy and Brian spent together, Landy would more and more get his clutches in Brian. Did I see a difference in Brian? Absolutely. Was he focused? Not as much. Some days he couldn't sing. Some days he couldn't do anything. I used to have to say, please, don't drug Brian. I need him to be aware and sing. So there was a big difference. During the second album, Sweet Insanity, there was always Landy there, always. But at this point, Brian and Landy are in kind of cahoots together. They put together an office in a studio in Santa Monica, and that's where we were going to make this new album of Brian. And that's Michael Bernard was back on board again, who we did the first Brian solo record with. And we just set up shop at the studio in Santa Monica and started recording all of Brian's ideas and everything. All of a sudden, things were starting to come out. He was heavily drugged at the time. Landy was pushing the drugs. I was able to see that. It was kind of disturbing. There were the takers, Kevin and Evan, who would always be with Brian and watch Brian all the time, 24/7. So Brian was really under watch and under key under Dr. Landy. Just a shame because Dr. Landy did save his life. Got him off drugs, got him healthy again, got him the deal to do the Warner Brother solo record. But now it was getting crazier. So we were in making Sweet Insanity a long time, a year, if not longer. The process usually worked that Brian would write the songs, and he'd basically write them on piano, and he'd kind of be banging away on the piano and come up with some chord ideas. And then we'd have Michael Bernard lay down some drums, some machine drums, and add some things to this, and it was just an experimental thing. Working with him was always, you didn't know what was gonna happen. You had no idea what he was gonna come up with that day and what would go on with it. A lot of great people showed up on that album. We did this one great song called The Spirit of Rock and Roll. And every famous person I could even think of came in. Because all you had to do was, somebody had to just say, hey, Brian wants you to sing on their record, and they'd come out. So one day Bob Dylan came out with Jeff Lynne and Tom Petty and Mike Campbell. Wow, that's cool. Then one day, John Stamos and Paula Abdul came out and sang on the record. Then another day, the Moody Blues came out and sang on the record. Three Dog Night. Boy, I have to even go through the list, there's so much more. After getting these people to sing on it, all of a sudden, Brian had this great idea to make it a wall of sound, which is how he made all of his records. So we went into a big studio, took 2 drummers, 3 bass players, 5 guitar players, a couple of keyboard players, and everybody playing the Spirit of Rock and Roll at the same time. Crazy, but it was unbelievable. But also at this point, Dr. Landy and his girlfriend have decided that they should be writing the lyrics to all the songs. And they were getting real personal with Brian's life, with how his father treated him. And his father treated him terribly. We were recording one day, Brian and I, just by ourselves, and he was singing a song, and he was singing about his father, and he was singing these lyrics that Landy had given to him. And he looked at me, Brad, my dad used to hit me with a 2x4. I want you to come in here and hit me with a 2x4 so we can get that sound on tape. I said, Brian, I'm not gonna hit you with a 2x4. We could take the 2x4 and hit it against the wall and do that. He goes, that's a good idea, let's do that. There was another song that was talking about, it was bad rapping the Beach Boys. It was not going well. A lot of great people were on the record. The music was nice, but all of a sudden these lyrics were getting out of control. And Warner Brothers finally said they would not put out the record, not do anything about it. The lyrics were just too insane. But I spent a lot of time with Brian during that. I watched him be controlled quite a bit. The movie Love and Mercy, it's jaded, it's not exactly right, but it shows a good part of that life. The only other good thing that Landy, I feel, really did for Brian was when Brian and the Beach Boys were young, their father, who was an asshole, sold their publishing for $30,000 to Capitol. Nothing. The Beach Boy catalog is worth hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. In Landy's delusion of grandeur, he decided he wanted that publishing money back. So he started the case against Capitol to sue and get the publishing money back. At that point, Brian's really under control. A lot of the Wilson family, Carl had died at this point, but the people in the Wilson family were kind of seeing what was going on, and they started to intervene and get Landy out of there. They eventually did. Brian eventually met Melinda, his wife, who passed away before him. They did all continue the lawsuit, which Landy started and has now been left. I don't think he deserves anything for it, because that wasn't his role, but they ended up winning the case, and the Beach Boys and Brian ended up winning. They're publishing back hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. One of the great things that came out of the Sweet Insanity session was one day Landy and Brian wanted to introduce me to a girl. Crazy, right? Those two? No way. They had known this girl for a while through the management company, because this girl worked for the Beach Boy management and been on the road with the Beach Boys and has done a lot of events with Brian, going as his date or somebody on his arm, I guess, kind of a thing. They thought I should meet this girl. I didn't want to really meet a girl that Brian and Landy wanted to set me up with. And what I found out later is I don't think this girl wanted to meet me either. This girl ended up coming to the studio one day, saying hi, and next thing I know, 6 months later, I asked her to marry me. And now we've been married for 33 years. That's my wife, Teddy. And Teddy worked for Tom Hewlett, did all the management for the Beach Boys and Brian Wilson, and then she went on to do radio promotion, to break Tool and Green Jelly. So she was in the music business, and we have been together now 33 years. So, Brian, thank you very much. Strange enough, we lived in the Westwood area, and there's a nice little park near us called Holmby Park. And one day, there with the kids, and who do I see running around the park? It's Brian Wilson. I didn't realize, because I had not seen him after Sweet Insanity, and I had not seen him after he'd been removed from Dr. Landy. He was living up in a nice house with Melinda, and he used to go down to Holmby Park and run it once or twice a week. And I'd run into him, and Teddy would run into him. And Brian, it's Brad, Teddy. Oh, this is Brian. Oh, Brad, Teddy, oh, great to see you. Gotta go. And he'd run and keep running. But we'd see him every now and then, and it was always a wonderful thing to see Brian. And that was kind of really the last time I saw Brian. That was really the last time I saw Brian.